Thanks. And by the way, my partner in the book, Jerry's in the front row. She's happy to sign copies, as I will be as well afterwards. Catch us on the breaks. So I want to welcome everybody. And my goal of this keynote has a couple aspects to it. One, I want to make sure that we're all put on the exact same footing when we're learning today and the exchanging of information about social media. So I'll be starting with that. And as well, the topic is the past, present, and future of measuring social media, its impact. I've always been a history buff. I love history, and I always approach everything I do in the business world from a historical perspective. And I always ask the question, why am I doing it? Has it been done before? If so, why was it successful? If it wasn't, why are we doing it again? What can we do differently? And that's how we're going to start this whole talk from there. Now, when I'm working with our clients, and then we start talking social media, everybody has a different definition of what social media is. If I went through this room and asked everybody what your definition of social media is, we'll probably come up with at least a dozen variations on the theme. So let's break it down. There we go. I like to break it down with my clients to social, and I love this definition out of the Canadian Oxford Dictionary. It's a noun, an informal social gathering, especially when organized by members of a particular club or group. Well, we're part of now the Media Bistro Club. We're here. This is a social gathering. Stuart had you meet the person beside you, behind you. Keep doing that. That's our informal part. Nice, simple. I think we can all agree on that one. When it comes to the media definition, I first turn to Merriam-Webster's. Once again, a noun, a medium of cultivation, conveyance, or expression. If we look at the Canadian Oxford Dictionary, an agency or means of doing something. And now we're putting those two concepts together. We're looking at what the meaning of social media is. And this is the definition I like to use with our clients. And that's how we can start measuring the impact. Because unless we can define what we're measuring, how can we measure the impact? So once again, it's a noun because we don't do social mediaing. It's social media. We use it. So it's a variety of medium used to draw together people with a common goal or objective. And if we keep that simple definition in mind, we're going to do wonders of increasing our knowledge today. It's a variety of medium. So things like Twitter, like Facebook, like LinkedIn, they are a medium. They in themselves are not social media. They are tools within that scope. And now I'm going to challenge you to think for a second. What was the first social medium that you used? And if I would grab a mic and wander through here, some people might say, well, I really didn't get into it until I started using Facebook. Some people say, oh, I was one of the first people on Twitter and I was tweeting where I was going for breakfast and all that cool stuff. Somebody's going, oh, I've been doing it for a while. I was on MySpace 10 years ago. Others are going to go, MySpace. I was using forums, around 2000, and other people had forums. I was on Usenet in the 80s and the 90s, and Internet Relay Chat, IRC before that. I know some people here were on community bulletin boards in the early 80s and maybe even late 70s. I'm going to tell you, you're all wrong. Pardon? Telephone. There we go. That's even an early one. That is. Especially if you had a party line way back when. No, half the crowd wouldn't even know what a party line is. But we actually all started using the exact same social medium. And it's hard for people to envision this one. Think for a minute, what's the one common thing that we all started to do? Close. We learned to cry. If anybody's been around a newborn baby and they go, what do we all do? Aww. And that's their medium. And they only have three objectives. Feed me, comfort me, or change me. And they know if they're successful because they stop crying. And that's easy to measure. The baby's not crying. They had an effective engagement with the crowd. It's that simple. Now, of course, if we want to move a little bit forward, we're not talking about babies crying and comforting them. You came out here to an event, which is a social event. You're going to have your own definition of this, what the impact was. Was this a successful engagement or not? Was it worth your time and financial investment? That's part of what you're going to leave with today. But when we're talking about social media and measuring its impact, we're not talking about the actual media. We're talking about social marketing. And that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts today. We don't care about a crying baby. Well, we do, but not from a marketing standpoint. We're going to see our efforts, the use of social media, helping us in a social marketing campaign. And I always like to equate with my clients the analogy of a fire. Social marketing is a fire. Why do I like the fire analogy? Anyone's walked by a fireplace? been to a campfire. Social marketing's goal is to draw people together. And since the early days of the caveman, when they first discovered fire, they gathered around it for communal meals, to jump up and down and grunt, show how they picked up a rock and smashed their prey's head, maybe had to sharpen a weapon. It was a social gathering point. And they were successful, or else we wouldn't be here today. And is that any different from what we do today? The campfire. How many people here love going to campfires? Yeah, most of you. There's a few people who hate them. They're smoky, it's cold, unless you're... But a good campfire draws people together. Somebody organizes it. And you don't always go there and see your old friends. You see old friends, new friends. And what do you do around the campfire beyond drinking a beer, a glass of wine, roasting marshmallows, make a hot dog? You start exchanging information. What do you do for a living? What restaurants have you been lately? What books are you reading? What movies have you seen? What have you thought about? Those things. Were they good? Were they bad? Should I do them? You're exchanging reviews. Is that any different than when we go to some of these properties, like Yelp, and we post a review, or one of the travel sites where we're posting, hotel reviews? No, this is what we were doing. And when do we leave? When we leave these campfires, we know personally, was it a success? Was the impact? And that's part of what we're going to try and learn how to measure. Now, I'm going to step us through, because my talk is about past, present, and future, the impact. So I'm going to move us, just 600 odd years ago, with Gutenberg and his printing press innovation. Was the printing press a social medium? How many people think a printing press is a social medium? There's just a few of you. That's fine. He had a simple goal, and he was going to measure his impact of his success, because his goal was really to make the Bible accessible to everybody. That was one of his goals. And in his lifetime, he started Bibles being produced and distributed in greater numbers than they ever had been before. He was really happy. But could he foresee what happened 300 years later because of his innovations? What his innovation did allowed the creation of the printed word to be cheaper and easier to distribute. So people started writing books. Literacy rates went up. And people started writing books critical of their government, critical of the monarchies. And in France, they actually banned the private ownership of the printing press. You needed government permission, a seal, that you were allowed to run a printing press, because they wanted to control the printed word. And what did people start doing? They started printing flyers in illegal presses, having people distribute the 200-300 flyers they could print a day about meetings, about rallies, and how they could protest things going on in the government with King Louis. And in itself, Gutenberg's press was a huge success and a catalyst, one of the catalysts that spurred on the French Revolution. And then hence, printing press became a medium for that social engagement. So for those who didn't think printing press was a social medium, you may want to think of it a little bit different way. It was a medium that allowed people to gather and convey information for a common goal. And is that anything different than what happened a year ago? In Egypt, they're celebrating the 1-year anniversary right now. We now talk about, Arab Spring, the power of Facebook, the power of Twitter. The power were in the words. But the words, the timing is different than it was 300 years earlier. Because now, when I'm on Twitter or I'm on Facebook, I can do it instantly. And what is the first thing the Egyptian government tried to do? Shut down the internet. Just like the French tried to shut down the printing presses, and people always come up with a way. So we talk about the Arab Spring being spurred on by social media, but it's the words, and it's the tools that are different. If we keep that concept, the tools are what have changed over time. When we come down to measuring impact, we can look back and understand what those impacts were and what we can expect and how to measure that success. Now, social marketing as a tool, in the good old days, and a little bit stereotyped, with a corner store, and it's been a long time since I've seen one of these in small northern towns, it wasn't uncommon for the shopkeeper to put out a checkerboard over a basket, over a pickle barrel, and the good old boys would come and play checkers all day long and chat. Now, why do they do this? Do they do this to keep the shopkeeper company? Maybe. Did they do it because these guys are going to buy a drink or buy some cigarettes or something else? No, not really. They became a store of social information for the community. People came to the shop to talk with these guys. They were the social medium. And the game was a point at which they would gather. And if somebody came into the shop and looked at a product they had never seen before and go, "Ooh, this looks interesting. Anybody know anything?" They would say, "Oh, like Mary Sue from, Mary Sue from 2 blocks over. She was in last week, bought one, so it was the best thing she'd ever used." They may have had other tips on using things. It became a store of information that, what do we do now? We go online to social sites to ask that question. And is that any different? We now have young people. I'm an old guy. I'm almost 50 years old. And they don't get off these smartphones. But they're looking up reviews. They're looking for that social exchange of information. Nothing has changed. The tool has changed. And these 4 people, for all we know, they're maybe even texting each other, right? They're side by side. I look at this and I always think of my 9-year-old son, who for a year saved up, any money that he got so he could buy himself an iPod Touch because a couple of his friends had one. And now even more of his friends have one. And what do? They get together. They're coming to our house to play. He's going to their house to play. And they all insist they have their iPods with them. Can't pry it loose from his fingers even when he wants to go to bed. And what do? They're sitting on the couch with each other with their iPods, going, "How did you do that in that game?" Sometimes they're playing an interactive game. My son, who barely at 9 years old can use a telephone, is doing FaceTime and texting his friends off his iPod. It's a social tool. And it's incredible to watch. And he comes in, "I was just playing a game with a guy in Israel. His handle is this." Now, I'm teaching my son about what he divulges online, but it's an interesting concept. It's not any different than these guys exchanging information and playing games. Nothing has changed. And anybody who's invented the games that are now on iPods, on your iPhones, on your Androids, nothing has changed. People want that social interaction, and games have always been part. And if you want to ask yourself, why are there games like Farmville as part of Facebook? Why did G Plus go out and have to put interactive games on there? It's to make their social properties a success, because people love games. I'm sorry, how many people like playing those online games? Come on. Nobody will ever admit it, right? The biggest time wasters there are. But you come there, especially if one of your buddies is online, and you haven't seen that buddy in years, and they're on the other side of the world, and you can play a game with them. What a great way of interacting and creating that social environment and making it a success. Now, this concept of interaction, of passing on information, has been around forever, as I mentioned. And in the 80s, Madison Avenue really understood this and put it in a commercial. Their problem was they couldn't measure it. And what do I mean about this? The multiplier of what we will talk social media. Let's listen to the
talk here. When I first tried Better Organic shampoo with pure wheat germ oil and honey, it was so good I told 2 friends about it. And they told 2 friends. And so on, and so on, and so on. And believe me, there's still nothing like the original Fabergé Organic. It gives me super shine, super body.
And super fresh smelling hair.
Try it, and we'll tell your friends about it. And they'll tell their friends, and so on, and so on. Be sure and get the original Fabergé Organic shampoo and conditioner with pure wheat germ oil and honey.
Now, that was circa 1980, 1981. There was even an earlier version of that commercial with Farrah Fawcett that I couldn't get a copy of. But Madison Avenue was using that concept of the multiplier. That I'll tell 2 friends, and they'll tell 2 friends. And that came from a very old marketing adage. If you treat someone well, they'll tell 2 people. If you treat someone bad, they'll tell everybody they meet that day. And what has changed? That multiplier. Because now you get good service at a restaurant, you're on Twitter. "Yeah, I was just at this restaurant. Unbelievable service." You're posting it on Foursquare. You're posting it on Yelp. Whatever it is. And who are you telling? Everybody you know. And if you only look at a factor of 1 in 10, for example, I put something out on Twitter, and there's about 3,200 followers or something. If 1 in 10 sees that in their stream, that's over 300 people. Maybe it only resonates with 1 in 10 of those. That means it resonated with 30 people who then can pass it on. Just think of how quickly that they then send it to their couple thousand to 60,000. Who knows how many followers or fans they have. It's incredible how fast, and that was the Arab Spring. It was the rate at which you can exchange that information and spread it. That multiplier effect is incredible. And that is what social marketing is about. It's about creating that campfire that's burning and attracting people and helping that information spread it at enormous speed. So how are you going to measure that social fire? That's the hard part. And that's how we're measuring the impact. I talked earlier, well, if I go to a campfire, I know if I had a good time, and that's how I'm measuring the impact. The baby cried. They in their minds, did they get what they wanted? So we first have to find, we need to measure the right stuff. And the biggest mistake is people are measuring the wrong stuff. I go to clients and say, oh, I've been measuring this. And they keep thinking they want to make the biggest fire. But having a huge fire doesn't mean more site traffic for you. It doesn't mean more in-store sales. It doesn't mean online sales. It doesn't mean profit. And let's talk about what you need to do to have a successful fire. And this is the items that you can measure, and hence measure the impact and know that you're being successful at social media. And this is something my kids learned in grade 2. You need 3 things for a successful fire: kindling or fuel, oxygen, a spark to get it going, and heat. If one of those is missing, you have no fire. You can have cords of wood piled up behind your house. There's lots of air around it. There's no heat. It's not going to ignite. It's safe. That's why we can store fuel. So let's talk about how we measure these things. The fuel, the kindling. When I do this analogy with our clients, I like to explain this way. This is your followers, your fans, your contacts, ultimately the head count. Now, I've been quoted many times from a post I did about 1.5 years ago that followers are the hits of social media. Anybody who's done any web analytics for more than 10 years remembers when we used to have to report hits because management wanted, which was a meaningless number. On their own, these are a meaningless number. And when I try to explain this to my clients, I go back to my being a history buff, and I bring up the Assyrians, who lived about 2,500 years ago. I know, lovely picture of them carrying heads. They had a method for understanding if they were successful in battle. They were warring people in Upper Mesopotamia. They cut off the heads of their enemy and counted them. Hence, we have a modern term, head count. And they would determine, was that battle, were we good at that battle? Did we win the battle? Did we collect more heads than we lost? That was a simple model. Were they measuring the wrong thing? Most certainly they were. Why? Because they didn't conceive how big their enemies were, how large their armies were, and that their enemies joined forces. And after a couple hundred years, attrition took its toll, their numbers dwindled, and they eventually disappeared into the general population because they were so focused on collecting heads and not building an economy, not building a sustainable business model. And this is where most of the clients that I go into are. I'll go in and go, oh, we got 20,000 fans on Facebook. Good. How many of those are engaged? How many are brand advocates? How many actually cared when you post? Don't know. How much did it cost you to get those 20,000? What did you get for it? Don't know. That is the problem when you're measuring the wrong thing. Simply measuring head count on its own isn't appropriate. Yes, you can use things like Cloud, Peer Index, Twitterlizer, and a variety of a dozen other things to help measure you have good quality people. Is your kindling nice and dry, ready to ignite? But you still need the other elements, and that's part of what we can measure. So the oxygen. I like to look at the oxygen as your content. Now, whether these are blog posts, Twitter updates, tweets, status updates, this is the content that you're putting out there. This is what you're putting around your wood, your kindling. And is it going to motivate people and generate the necessary heat? It's simple. We can measure how often you're doing a blog post. Is it once a week? Is it every day? Is it twice a week? You can even find the right mix. That becomes a key to measurement. How often should I do a message to my fans on our Facebook page? Those are components that we can measure. Now we want to talk about the heat that's going to ignite people. And these are the likes, shares, comments, retweets, G+, stumble-upons, Reddits, whatever is appropriate for your oxygen. And this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to stimulate people who are going to pass on this information. That is measurable. There are numerous tools that help you do this. You have to find the right pace. And with these, you can start succeeding and fine-tuning your social marketing campaigns to optimize them. But we need the right balance. If you throw too much wood into a fire, it burns itself out. If you remove the heat by throwing cold water on it, it stops. That's the same thing. And if you don't get the mix right, you first of all get an explosion. And if you don't have an emergency social media PR plan in place, you get a raging forest fire. And you're now driving all your fans and followers away from you. Just think about last week in the Sopa Pipa protests. Everybody familiar with that? I was on social media, on Twitter especially, going back and forth with the discussion with supporters, agreeing, and people were disagreeing and agreeing, and people people who were against it. We were having lovely conversations. Nobody in the general public took notice. The congressman in the United States couldn't care less because there was no protest outside Congress protesting it. They didn't understand that social messaging, that this was going on. When Google and Wikipedia and others got it on, and one person put out a blog post, we should have a day of protest. Yeah, that's a good idea. What day shall it be? And they picked the day, and all of a sudden, Wikipedia went down, black bars across Google, all sorts of... The general public took notice of, oh, what is this? The Congress had their forest fire, and they had no plan to control it. They were so far ahead that if they would have controlled the message, that legislation would have been passed already. Think of BP oil spill. Once again, they lost control of the messaging. And that's where we want to watch fire. You don't want to drive people away as you would run from a forest fire. You want that campfire. You want to bring people in. So where's the future taking us? I'm talking about what we can do today. There are great tools coming out now that are helping us measure better, more accurately the engagements in social media and so forth. But I'm a firm believer we're going to be going back to old school. We're going to have new tools, but we're going to be talking about social media for fun and profit. Because we're going to start looking at changes in volume and quality and changes in the fuel source. Are fans, followers growing as we're doing this? Is the quality of these people growing? And then we'll be using scoring tools to measure the quality of the people who we're engaging with. What about the quality of our oxygen? Are we getting better thing? Are we engaging better with the people? How often are we doing this? These are all measurable. We're going to have better tools for doing this. And measuring the heat. And with the correct measurements, we're going to get a great understanding of the impact we're having. And it's ultimately going to be to the corporate bottom line. And if you think about the shampoo commercial that we have with Heather Locklear, they had no way of understanding how many people you told, how many people they told. But when that campaign came out, sales of that shampoo went through the roof. The modern analogy is the Old Spice guy. It was a huge marketing success. My first question is it improving their sales? Is it improving their bottom line? For the first month, they did not see any sales improvement. Actually, sales had declined. And of course, the naysayers all came out and said, great award-winning commercial, it's not doing anything. They have to wait for the buying cycle to people to use up their shampoos and body washes. And as they replaced them, their sales went through the roof. That becomes the measurement, the impact. Understanding of what you're doing from a social marketing campaign is not going to turn a profit as if buying ads on Google. Oh, I'm looking for the best, remote clicker. There's an ad for remote click, buy. That's not social marketing. Social marketing is drawing your brands together, having them bring other people to the campfire, engaging them, becoming brand advocates, and ultimately will impact your bottom line. And as tools improve, we are going to be there with some great information in creating that successful campfire. And let's not get into the mistake that too many companies are doing. They're measuring the heat, the size, the girth of their fire. Because if you measure only that, you're going to have problems. So we're going to build campfires, not forest fires. So let's draw that community in so we can engage with them. And not drive people away. Don't publish so often that you scare people away. And I work my tools. If I put up too many tweets, I can see my follower count go down. I put up just the right number, my follower count goes up because I'm getting retweeted. It's not, going over people's heads. And in the immortal words of the Bare Naked Ladies, I love this band out of Toronto. I've been listening to them since the 80s. They have a great song. It's called "It's All Been Done Before." If you ever listen to the lyrics, you'll understand why I'm referencing it. So let's first of all stop reinventing the wheel. Let's learn from history and apply it to today so we can use it more wisely. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you. If you have questions, find me around. My business partner Jim's over there as well if you want to set up something. If you're looking for the copy of the book to get signed, my co-writer Jerry's in the front row there. And we're going to transition over to the next speaker.
Do you need a microphone or anything? Questions?